I am here, yes.
We'll call this regular meeting of council to order for Monday, April 8th, 2013. I'll ask the council to consider the adoption of the agenda. The recommendation is that the agenda for the regular council meeting of April 8th, 2013 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Kenny. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. The agenda is adopted. For council's consideration tonight, there are 3 sets of minutes. The first are the minutes from the special council meeting of March 25th, 2013. They come with a recommendation that they be adopted. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted. The second set of minutes are for the regular council meeting of March 25th, 2013. The recommendation is that they be adopted. Moved by Councillor Kenny, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted. The third set of minutes are minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting of March 25th, 2013. The recommendation is that they be received. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes have been received. We'll move on to item 6 under recommendations and reports. And there's a report from the city planner. This is regarding antennae system siting protocol template. Comes with a recommendation that council adopts a customized antenna system siting protocol following public engagement and subject to staff recommendations. Mr. Krekic, would you like to outline your report on antenna systems?
Thank you, Your Worship. Arguably, antenna and supporting infrastructure are not structures. Technically, telecommunications fall under the federal jurisdiction. And actually, those towers that we depend on so much for our communications and day-to-day work are showing up in urban areas. The desire for more telecommunications is continuing, and actually it kind of started to evolve in the 80s, at which time there were some reports that we identified through our research, which were initiated by municipalities desiring to have more say in seeing towers showing up in urban areas, especially when they show up in residential areas. They create confusion and issues. The first report is from 1987. It was done by University of New Brunswick. And it deals with the contradictory nature of constitutional authority on certain buildings and lands which are within municipal boundaries, but which are vested exclusively within federal jurisdiction. So basically how antennas work is that Industry Canada is a lead agency. It covers or refers to Health Canada for radio frequency exposure limits, which are specifications given to antenna providers. Transportation Canada is another agency, Aeronautical Safety, and SIA when triggered by the size or the location of the antenna. From that report, there is a lapse in time until about 2003 when federal government conducted national antenna review. And it was a substantial piece of work which produced new policies and procedures that were that were given to antenna providers. The most noted one is the Guide to Assist Land Use Authorities in Developing Antenna Siting, which was a fairly good document, but it was still very paternalistic and with a large dose of paramountcy reminders. The latest document was issued in February of this year, and it was by FCM, that's Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and Canadian Wireless Telecommunication Association. And the purpose of this document is to provide local governments with a protocol template, which was supported by the telecommunication industry, number one, Federation of Municipalities, number two, and that was consistent with Industry Canada policies. Now, over the last half a dozen years, the staff has been relatively lucky, and I guess we also have to be good to be lucky. And we have navigated to a handful of antennas, a few atop of Mount Hayes, a few atop of Highliner, a little bit closer to urban environment, one by Butsy Rapids, which is a substantial one, one by Fairview Terminal, one just recently in front of the Northwest Community College. And Rogers Cable has been communicating with me over the last year or so about a tower in Seal Cove.
Mr. Cricket, what would you like this council to consider?
I will just finish my report by exactly saying that, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Rather than waiting for controversy, Your Worship, and there are many, most notably right now, one in Thornhill, a couple of 3 years ago, one in Port Edward. Staff recommends that we handle this thing in a way that has been given to us by higher authorities, and to adopt a template, or to adopt a policy based on a template that was attached to your report, which would go as follows. 2 newspaper information advertisements in late April, open house engagement meeting in early May, and on May 27, I propose to bring to you the amended template. In conclusion, the siting of antenna towers can be problematic. Having siting protocol will help with clarifying jurisdictional issues and give council and staff clarity when needing to make a decision. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Councillor Ashley.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Kinney. Councillor Thorkelson, discussion.
I spent a long time reading this, and my eyes are sore. But I have I had a few things for clarification, if I could ask them, and it could be that you might not, that Mr. Cricket might not know yet, and so I don't expect an answer right now. But
right, certainly, please go ahead.
What I was wondering is, it talks about exemptions, and I was wondering if these are automatic exemptions, or can we choose not to follow these exemptions? Are these legislative exemptions by higher authority that we have to follow, or can we not follow those exemptions?
Perhaps a second read will give you a slightly better understanding, or perhaps after this presentation you may have a little bit more background. But exemptions are strictly from the Industry Canada, and they include things like, for example, less than 15 meters or 25% of the height improvements. However, in the protocol, there's a section that will announce that these are exemptions, but they will definitely ask everybody to abide by the regulations. So this is one of the pieces where the protocol actually gives ability for staff to talk to providers, even though they may be exempted from the policies.
So because Industry Canada exempts them, that means that we can't unexempt them.
We cannot unexempt them, but we can definitely ask for the providers to provide all of the information that we can share with the community prior to doing something.
And they had some will language in here where it talked about the parties will work towards a mutually acceptable agreement regarding 4.2.1, and 4.2.2 says that the proponent and the municipality will work to a mutually agreeable solution. And what I was wondering is how much leeway do we get with this protocol? Because what I was thinking, Mr. Krecker, is that if this is what the protocol has to be, then why would we bother taking it to a public hearing, wasting everybody's time, right? If we're just going to be told this is what the protocol has to be, and so that's why I was wondering, because I had a bunch of will words, and if the Industry Canada said this is how it has to be, these are the things we have to exempt, then I just sort of wondering why we would worry about. We should just say this is the protocol and go with it, because it didn't seem to me to be too many things that we could actually where we actually could change the protocol, and that's, I guess, more or less what I want to talk about, instead of going through all the wills that I found in here, was just find out if we can change it, then it's worthwhile. If we can change it substantively, then it's worthwhile taking it to the public and say there's choice A, choice B, choice C, choice D. If you can't change it substantively, unless we have to take it out as a bylaw or something like that for those reasons, for public consultation, but not just to talk about it, that's all.
Mr. Roden.
I've just given this a fairly quick read myself, and I think that both Councillor Thorkelson and City Planner Kreckett are correct. Industry Canada does exempt antennae of a certain height, and basically then it's, from what I can see, is that there's a bit of consultation that goes on, but it does look like they pretty much can do what they want to do. However, anything over that, then it's far more rigorous, and that's where the city's regulation and policy will come into play. So you're correct, Councillor Thorkelson. If it's under a certain height, then it's pretty much, it looks to me like it's a bit of a done deal too. But on the other hand, if it's extending over 15 meters, then that's when the city can be far more specific about its siting and location than before. So I think we'll learn a little bit more through the process of having the open house, and I would encourage that council give staff direction to follow this process.
Councillor Rice, have you got any questions?
Hi, sorry, I'm on mute. I don't have any questions at this point, no.
Okay. Are there any other questions regarding this topic? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. The motion is adopted. There's also a report from the building inspector and the corporate administrator regarding the building at 1183 Ambrose Avenue. Comes with a recommendation that the dwelling located at 1183 Ambrose Avenue and legally described as lots 21, 22, 23, and 24, Block 3, Section 7, Range 5, Plan 923, District Lot 251, be declared a nuisance under Section 74 of the Community Charter, and that the registered owners, Mr. and Mrs. Wong, you and Pierre Wong, be required to remove or demolish the building within 30 days, and further that for the purpose of this resolution, remove or demolish shall mean to either remove or cause to be removed all buildings, components, including but not limited to the roof, beams, walls, floors, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical systems to the foundation, and if there are any concrete or wood pilings or piers, that they be removed and the building site be filled to the prevailing grade. Mr. Grodecki, Mr. Roden, have you got anything further to add to this?
Just what's in the report, Your Worship. The building suffered a fire in November of 2005. It's basically, once it got boarded up, it hasn't been touched. City staff has tried to contact the building owners with registered mail and can't engage them to see what they're going to do with the property. So we've received complaints about it, and now it's here in front of council for a wreck and remove resolution.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley.
I'm just wondering, are taxes up to date on the property?
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you.
I'll ask council's consideration of the recommendation contained in the report. Councillor Ashley.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Garon. Any discussion? Councillor Thorkelson.
As usual, the owner can come and talk to us about why.
Certainly, within 30 days, yes.
Within 30 days, thank you.
Yes. Anything further? Question has been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is adopted. Next, we have a report again from the corporate administrator, and this concerns a municipal alcohol policy program. Comes with a recommendation that council strike a committee to formulate a draft municipal alcohol policy. Mr. Grodecki, this is a brave topic for you to suggest. If you'd like to outline your report.
Yes, Your Worship. A grant was applied for and received for $7,000 to help create a municipal alcohol policy. In a nutshell, about 15 or 20 years ago in Ontario, the provincial government supported a program where municipalities would develop a municipal alcohol policy, and what it would do was set the rules of the game for when people are renting city-owned venues and using a special occasion liquor license to sell to public. And they found that it was successful in Ontario. So BC followed up with it. They ran a couple of pilot projects, one in Whistler, I believe, and again, it was deemed successful. So now we've got the grant, and it's been suggested that we form a committee with sort of across a number of different organizations to try and review the existing templates that are out there, both in British Columbia, and then work a draft up and bring it back for council's consideration.
So is this for our own community, or is this for communities in the area?
This would be just for Prince Rupert's, just for our own community. Because of the nature of the membership on the committee that brought this to our attention in the first place, Port Ed, we would share. I talked to Port Ed. We would share whatever draft policy we want, and they can look at it themselves. But of course, that's their end. They could do with it what they will. But for us, the idea is to bring a draft policy back based on input from a number of different organizations in the community and see if it makes sense for the city of Prince Rupert.
So the policy provides awareness with regard to alcohol or the use of alcohol. Does it encourage drinking? Does it discourage drinking? What does it do? What's the effect of the policy?
Well, it tightens up the rules and through education and sometimes by law enforcement if necessary, or just a higher degree of enforcement. It's just that, they found that it's reduced fighting, reduced vandalism in different areas, just more control over special occasions liquor license that are using in public facilities. That's the end goal, and so far it's been proven to be successful.
Thank you. I'll ask council's consideration of this. Councillor Garon. Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Thorkelson. Comments from members of council. Councillor Ashley.
I'm not against having this, but I like the idea, when I look at the key components it's talking about, I like the idea of having prevention strategies. Some of the things that are in here, though, seem to be a little bit redundant in that there are provincial laws and city bylaws that I think we have already that cover off these things, that say you're not supposed to have alcohol in certain places, and there are if you're drinking in a public place, there is, the RCMP can enforce that type of thing. So I guess I'm a little bit maybe just not understanding how this works, because it looks like for the key components, you've got to designate the properties, facilities, and events. You've got to have management practices. Those things I think are kind of already covered under other things. Prevention strategies I think make sense because we maybe don't have that covered. But enforcement, policy support, those kinds of things I think we already have. So my question would be, do we have to kind of reinvent the wheel, or are we allowed to focus in on the stuff we don't have?
Mr. Grodecki, are you aware? And perhaps this is more as a awareness tool, but if you have any comments.
Just that I think there are templates, but we certainly can customize it. And I think the committee and ultimately council, when they consider the draft policy in the future, can focus on, or even before the committee is struck, ask the committee to focus on certain aspects that you've just discussed, as opposed to avoiding the ones that are already covered off.
Any further comments, Councillor Thorkelson?
And my read of this is that it is only to do, and I think Mr. Grodecki said that, it was only to do with
special events.
On city-owned venues, right? But I do think that it's always good for us to go over our alcohol policies for our own venues, and we have a grant to do this, if that's correct. I think
$7,000, yes.
Yeah, and I think that it's good to have a look at if we've had any problems at city-owned venues. What would have been better? I think. The Rampage games, they got the rugby club to bounce, so that's good. Now, if they didn't have the rugby, do we make that a condition, or is it just something that they decided to do themselves, right? And those are the kinds of things. So it may be that we have to say you have to have so many bouncers with first aid tickets or whatever, or that may be something that we would want to do, or it might be something we wouldn't want to do. But it's not a bad idea for when we're renting out facilities and there is alcohol consumption to be clear about what our rules are and the kinds of things that we'd like to do to deal with them.
Thank you. Councillor Rice, have you got any comments?
Sorry for the lag time. It's the mute button.
It creates a lot, Councillor Rice. It creates a lot of anticipation. It's great. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry to say I have nothing really profound to say except I don't really see any harm in doing this, and I think I agree with Councillor Thorkelson that it's always good to review the alcohol policy. So I would vote in favor.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Grodecki used the words "it was meant to tighten up." I'm not sure if that's a Freudian slip or not.
I don't have any more comments to make on this.
You actually made Anson laugh.
Thank you. If there's nothing further, all questions been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. We'll move on to correspondence for action. There's a letter of support, or it's a request for a letter of support, and the request comes from Planet Youth, and it's seeking support for additional funding. It comes with a recommendation that Council write a letter of support as requested. Mr. Roden, would you like to outline the actual request? It's from the youth worker at Planet Youth.
I'm going to let Mr. Grodecki handle this one. He was putting together the agenda. Can you give me a hand on this, sir?
Yes, certainly. What's happened is Planet Youth is a program operated at the Friendship House. It's literally has run out of funding, but they have an application in front of one of the departments of the Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development. And what it is, it's focused on youth between First Nations youth between 10 and 24, teaches life skills, job hunting skills, cultural connections, and other activities that help them grow into becoming productive members of society. And they've asked for a letter of support, and so subsequently it's here in front of Council for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kenny.
I would like to support this
Okay, motion's been moved to support. Seconded by Councillor Ashley. Discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That recommendation's adopted. Next is another request. This is for a letter of support, and this is from the District of Invermere, seeking support against towns without councils. It comes with a recommendation that council write to the UBCM, that's the Union of BC Municipalities Executive, expressing council's concerns regarding this issue. Mr. Grodecki, would you like to outline the report, yourself or Mr. Roden?
What's happened, I don't know all the details, Your Worship, but essentially what this is, it's a letter from the District of Invermere. There is a resort that has been created called the Jumbo Glacier Mountain Resort Municipality. It's not going to be eligible for membership with the Union of BC Municipalities because it doesn't have an elected council. In that way, it's probably a little bit like the original resort municipality of Whistler Council. I don't think they were elected either, nor was probably the first resort municipality of Sun Peaks. So anyways, the District of Invermere has this concern, and they're asking for our support that this practice of the provincial government cease, because it's essentially they've created a town that doesn't really have residents yet, and it doesn't have an elected council, and so it's basically it exists solely on paper to some extent, and Invermere has some questions about whether or not it's a good practice or a bad practice, and they're asking the UBCM to do something about it. So we can either choose to write a letter in support, or we can let this one slide by and perhaps let other municipalities which are more familiar with the situation weigh in on it.
Thank you. They perhaps make a good point, but in the creation of new communities, and the same thing happened when they created Tumbler Ridge and other communities, they actually, in the case of Tumbler Ridge, appointed somebody as a commissioner so that they could get on with the development of the streets, the roads, the infrastructure, and set up the community as a legal entity. And then as soon as the basics were in place, they then sold the property and the town was created, and they did go to a municipal council. So the District of Invermere makes a point, but I'm not sure how strong it is and what you would replace the actual creation of new communities with if you didn't use what's been used for a number of years. I'll ask Council's consideration of the matter. Councillor Ashley.
Well, I have to say, I find it a little bit confusing. Like, even just the wording is confusing, like the way that they've written the resolution. I think I understand the concept now that a couple people have talked about it, that they've created a municipality for the eventuality that people will live there, and then eventually there'll be a council elected. But what I'm confused about, and I'm looking for clarification here, is the District of Invermere against them doing that or for them doing that?
Mr. Roden?
Excuse me, Your Worship, they're against it, and my recommendation to Council is that we simply receive this report for information purposes.
Thank you. Councillor Thorkelson.
I move that this report be received and filed.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Thorkelson, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Any further discussion? Councillor Rice, do you have anything to say?
Hit that button.
Sorry for the big anticipation. I don't have anything to say. I guess I'm not 100% clear on the act, so I probably just would support,
receive and filing
for information. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That'll be received and filed. Next is a request for a proclamation from the Public Works Association of British Columbia, and it would be to proclaim Public Works Week from May 19th to 25th, 2013. It comes with a proclamation that Council proclaim that week in May as the Public Works Week in the City of Prince Rupert. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is adopted. We'll move down to report City Manager, outstanding issues. Mr. Roden.
Pretty much the only outstanding initiative from 2012 that Council is still dealing with is the Shimshan Access Project and also Watson Island. It's no news to Council that staff and Council are continuing to work with various bodies to try and bring about a positive resolution to both of those issues. And that's basically where we are on the strategic plan. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Mr. Roden, with regards to the Shimshan Access Project, we did follow up with the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, and she did point out that her staff were continuing to work on that. I did request that they create the format for that project so that it could be reviewed by the provincial government and the federal government. And the reason for that, of course, is because it involves our neighboring communities of Metlakatla and Lac Ouillams. And whether or not the province is able to proceed as a partner in that, we still need that information put together as the province offered in a format acceptable to the federal government for consideration so that our neighboring Aboriginal communities can take that to the appropriate ministry in Ottawa. So if you'd send a request to the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure requesting the status of this topic and where they are in putting that together, as I requested the Minister to have her ministry provide.
Certainly, Your Worship.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Roden? Councillor Ashley.
I'm just wondering, I believe it was at the last meeting, could have been the one before that, but we were talking about, I believe it was a letter from the port regarding the waterfront plan, and they were wondering where we were at, and then we were talking about where that would fit in terms of our strategic priorities in the list. And I know that staff has been very busy, but I was hoping that we could get an update like on our strategic priorities and then be able to have a discussion about that at our next council meeting.
Certainly.
So that we can kind of say, well, you know, is this maybe more important than something else we have on there, and do we want
Right.
to switch things around?
Yeah.
So
That may be, well, it's very timely, and considering that there's an election coming, and then after that election we would then again introduce our priorities to a new government. It's an appropriate thing. Mr. Roden, do you understand the request?
I believe I do, Your Worship.
Thank you. If you'd put something on the next agenda. Any further questions for Mr. Roden? If not, I'll do the Mayor's report. Yes, please go ahead.
Mine it's just a report from members of council.
Yes, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say for those people who are interested, including council, that the Enbridge hearings are winding down. The last Enbridge panel, the last subject was shipping and navigation, and they had a number of people that were experts on Enbridge's behalf, and the last questioning on that panel closed on on Saturday. And this week, Enbridge gets a chance to question the people they wanted to question that wrote expert reports on various topics. And so today, the expert witnesses from that did reports for the GitGat, Hartley Bay, they were questioned today, and tomorrow there will be questionings of, I believe, the Haisla maybe a couple of people from the GitGap on economic development. And then I believe on Wednesday is Kitkatla, and Thursday is environmentalists who have written reports that are going to be questioned. So, and that will be it for the Enbridge side of things. Then on the 22nd, it will be the Government of Canada for the week of the 22nd that will be questioned. So DFO will be questioned on the 22nd. 23rd is mostly Coast Guard and Environment Canada. And then there's Transport Canada and a few other, I can't remember what the other government agencies that are actually agreed to be questioned. And then that's it for the questioning. And then there will be final, and that's it for Enbridge people being in Rupert. And then there will be the final arguments made in June, or written arguments due the end of May, final arguments in June, and they will be in Terrace. So this is on the week of the 22nd will be the last of the Enbridge money floating through town into our local restaurants, bars, and hotels. So anyway, I just thought people may be interested.
Thank you. The people that are giving their information, do they have local knowledge?
These experts have been hired to do a number of things. Some of them have been local people. Today, for example, they had, along with a group of anthropologists that have been doing work for the GitGap, they also, and some sociologists on sociological impact reports. They also had Cam Hill from, who's a teacher and a fisherman from Hartley Bay was also giving evidence today, and then they had LGL, who does lots of work up here doing the environmental studies, and they had as assistants in the back row many of the people from many of the staff from Hartley Bay, from the GitGap.
So they heard from local mariners.
No, they haven't heard from other than Mr. Cam Hill. They heard from no. They have chosen not to question so far any local people, and in fact, I was the last person that got to question them on Saturday, and for the last questionings of Enbridge, and their shipping and navigation report. The people who did the shipping and navigation report for Enbridge didn't contact one fisherman in this town or one commercial fisherman in Kitimat. They talked to a couple of recreational people in Kitimat and a couple of tour operators in Rupert. And what they did is they talked to the coast pilots, and they said they didn't need to talk to any local people because the coast pilots knew everything. And as you can imagine, I suggested there were maybe small fish boats may have different kinds of concerns, like being in the way of large vessels. The coast pilots may not have as many concerns as commercial fishermen. And in fact, we had quite a discussion about that. But really, there was a huge lack of any kind of local communication with local mariners other than the coast pilots, who do, of course, pilot ships through our community on a regular basis, but they are not the small boat fleet that reside here, either recreational or commercial.
Well, certainly the opinion of a helmsman and the conditions under which they sail can vary depending on the size of the wheelhouse and the height of the vessel off of the water. So in your opinion, Councillor Thorkelson, would it be worth sending a letter to the Commission telling them that on a localized basis we believe there is some deficiency in their information procurance by not considering local mariners who sail in a variety of vessels and just not in the foreign going vessels? And do you think they would listen to it if we sent them a letter on behalf of Prince Rupert City Council and the residents of Prince Rupert?
I never think it hurts to do that kind of thing, but I will tell you it won't get on the official record because any admissions like that would have to have been made a year and a half ago. And when we sent in our intervener statement from the city of Prince Rupert, and
how about if we send individual letters to the individuals involved in handling the proceedings? Would that have any effect?
I would think that instead of sending a letter to the Joint Review Panel, I think that sending a letter directly to Northern Gateway and copying it to the panel would be a better way of doing things. It won't put anything on record, but the panel will know that we've sent that letter, and that and Northern Gateway will. And really, they should be ashamed of themselves. I mean, can you imagine coming to Prince Rupert, hopping on a I can't remember which adventure boat, but they took one of those yellow boats,
right.
Tour boats.
One of the banana fleet.
Yes, down to Kitimat and up through Kitimat Arm, and they had a meeting in Kitimat, and they called that community consultations, and mainly when they were pushed, they met with no First Nations. Not only they didn't meet with people from our community, they didn't meet with any First Nation people who traveled by vessel. They didn't talk to any of the First Nations ferry systems. They really just talked to the coast pilots and thought that was adequate and made a big deal about that being adequate.
Thank you. Councillor Kinney and then Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had the pleasure of attending the Guns N' Hoses hockey game opening on your behalf, and it was wonderful to see what they did for our fireman Butch Duffy. And the proceeds are going to the Lou Gehrig Disease Foundation, and it was nice to see that the fireman won on his behalf. And the other thing, Your Worship, was Councillor Garon and myself were at the social services meeting at the Highliner, and I would like to send special thanks to your Secretary, Candace, and to Marilyn for the wonderful job they did of gathering all these people. And it was 60, I think there was around 60 people involved in that luncheon meeting, and it went for 3 hours, but it was really good.
Thank you very much for attending both of those functions on behalf of myself and the other members of council. Yes, certainly.
I just wanted to ask Councillor Kinney, is there going to be a report? I was at the Ember Cheers. I couldn't attend that, and I was quite distressed over that, but you just can't leave when you're there because you might miss your turn. So I was wondering, is there a report that's going to come out of that? Because that's really something I was so interested in.
I believe there'll be another public meeting held, and there's a report coming. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to go over a few details from that meeting that Councillor Kinney and I went to. Marlene Swift and Candace were very instrumental in organizing it. 40 people stood up and talked about what type of social service work they did in the community, which was astounding that there's that many people delivering services in Prince Rupert. Some of them didn't know that the others were providing those services, so it was good that they could see who was who in the zoo and who's doing what, and nobody got a chance to really talk about what was working and what didn't work. It was just a chance for everybody to get up and say what they were doing. Candace took a lot of notes. I took a whole binder full of notes. I personally think that there's some things that are being duplicated. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, but it'd be nice to get the group together again to try to facilitate some type of, I don't know if you'd call it a strategic plan, how the group would feel about it, but I really think that some work needs to be done. What that looks like, I have no idea, but they were very happy that we had facilitated the meeting for them. It's distressing that there's that many people in Prince Rupert that require the amount of assistance that is out there. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of work is being done. And I think we do need to maybe strike some type of committee with some of the people in the group that met to organize some type of forum or strategic plan of some kind. There's so many agencies that are out there that some of the agencies don't know that those agencies exist that are receiving grant money to do good work. But sometimes I think things are being duplicated, and maybe people can work. We could try to get social services to deliver services more efficiently or effectively. I really don't know what works and what doesn't, but I think it's an opportunity for us to facilitate another meeting.
Thank you. That is the intention to hold another meeting. Mr. Roden, you had something you wanted to comment on.
The idea of sending a letter to the Gateway folks and all that yourself and Councillor Thorkelson were talking about, I don't know if we got a resolution to send that letter. If we could have one, please. Councillor Thorkelson, if you'd like to make a resolution, we'll see how the council would like to act to that.
Sure. I move that we write to Enbridge Northern Gateway and say that we were dismayed to learn that they had not consulted any local mariners in our communities or neighboring communities regarding the issue of safety and navigation.
Including the communities in Douglas Channel.
Including the communities in Douglas Channel.
Thank you. And pointing out that mariners in vessels of various sizes use those waters year-round.
We could add that. Thank you. That's what I move.
Okay. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kenny. Discussion. Just to be fair, Councillor Rice, we can't see you, so I'm not sure whether you'd like to comment on anything here.
No, I support the motion, and I intend to vote in favor of it. And if you don't hear anything from me, then I'm voting in the affirmative.
Okay, well, Councillor Kenny is very concerned you might be falling asleep there, so he wants me to keep checking in with you. Thank you very much, though. So the question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. Councillor Kenny.
Your Worship, I had one thing to add from what Councillor Garon has just talked about from that meeting with the social services, because I was very pleased because it's something that I've been trying for about 6 months or a year. Their biggest request was a bus on Sunday, and all the ministers in town were there, and weren't they, Gina?
This is for seniors to go to church and get back and forth downtown for shopping.
And to go down and buy their medication.
So that's to do with BC Transit. We would make the request through BC Transit and the transit operator, and they would tell us what it would cost to provide that. But that was one of the requests.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roden, if you could investigate that, please.
Certainly, Your Worship.
It's budget time. Councillor Ashley.
Just with this talk about the social services, it reminded me of something that I was going to bring up. I'm not sure if anybody else heard it. I believe it was on CBC, and they were doing an interview talking about various communities around BC. I think around 17 of them getting about $100,000 to recruit a doctor into their community, and we weren't among them. And I was just wondering, because I know that while we've made strides from when we first got on to like having much better, I don't think it's perfect here, and I think there's still some situations where perhaps specialists and other things are, when they go on vacation, perhaps there's gaps. And what I was wondering is I'd like to have us write a letter and ask why we weren't considered in terms of that, and also to ask, or to send a letter perhaps to Sheila Gordon-Payne at Northern Health and ask whether or not there are needs that we should be advocating for, because if other communities are getting this, I don't think that they're necessarily any worse off than we are. And so I'd like to make that a motion that we...
Okay, I'd ask you just to be a little bit more specific.
Okay.
You heard something on CBC. Was it for the recruitment of doctors into northern communities?
I believe it was for the recruitment. So, I mean, I would be prepared to ask staff to investigate that and then come back to the next council meeting, and then I would make that motion.
Certainly. Any information you can give does help the staff. Thank you. Anything else? No. Councillor Kenny and then Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. At the Northern Health meeting last week, it was brought up about the what they're doing is they're trying to recruit doctors for areas like Hazelton, Stewart, et cetera, making it a little more, so they'll stay. But they're offered that 2,000 or whatever it is, or 200,000, whatever it is altogether. But they get a down payment, and if they stay the full 3 years, they get another one. But if they leave, they have to pay it all back. But it was for areas that really couldn't get doctors.
Councillor Ashley.
Oh, thanks. I'd still like to hear perhaps more
Yeah,
information.
we'll get staff to clarify.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's just Hazelton, Stewart, that stuff makes sense. There were a couple communities, and I can't remember them off the top of my head, that were mentioned that I'm like, well, we're around the same size, and I'm not sure where it was.
Well,
yeah, so information would be good.
Certainly. And one of the questions we could pose to Northern Health is, should this community grow beyond the existing projects we have now, or some of the small to medium-sized projects we know may come in the next year or two, knowing that, of course, some of the ones that are taking place now will have been completed. But if we're going to get into the point of having 3,500 person construction camps here, or trying to facilitate numbers even half that size, what's the Northern Health Authority done in other communities where they go through a growth spurt, and what sort of things are they anticipating that we would need in this community as a healthcare provider? I believe Councillor Garon was next.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on a lighter note, I'm going to talk about the lights.
The street lights.
Yeah, there's new lights on my street, and it's, I think it takes a little while to get used to because it's a different type of light, but you sure can see a whole heck of a lot better. But I know people are having a bit of a issue with them because I think it's a totally different hue of a light, and I've heard some comments that people think it's too bright at night in their windows, but other than that, I think it's great. I can see outside when I'm driving.
Thank you. We are in a transition period with regard to street lights. There's more being put in street by street every day now. Councillor Thorkelson.
It's sort of on the do list issue, and it's probably it's something that we're really going to need to look at in the fall. I feel it's probably something we need to get a CAO, we need to get a CFO, we need to get them settled in. But I'm really concerned that we not be behind the 8 ball with growth in our city, and that we somehow sit down and have some kind of a workshop and talk about the things that you were just talking about, Your Worship, about asking Northern Health, like making a do list of all the things, or a question list of all the things we need to be done. How are we going to, there's areas of town that, where the housing is old. Maybe those are areas where we want to look at land use development changes to look at supporting condos or some kind of higher density. We sort of had, when we did the community plan, we weren't thinking about growth at that time. We might hope about growth, but we weren't really thinking about growth. And now maybe we should be looking at where would we put new schools? What would it look like for, maybe even sit down with the school board and the health board and really just have a brainstorming session of all of the things that might, policing, all the things that might come up as issues with both two things, one with temporary people in town for the construction workforce, as well as permanent people in town moving in, some of them to fill the jobs, the new jobs in our community. There certainly will be some people moving in. But I just think that we should, maybe even try to keep a list of all the things we talk about, so that when we actually maybe get around in the fall to sitting down, we'll have a little list, a little checklist of all of the things that we've tried to remember to talk about. For this kind of a thing. Mr. Grodecky, you're going to be the only staffer here in the fall, if you're still here, unless we wear you out. And but to have a list, where like Your Worship is musing about Northern Health, and if they have any suggestions, and what about the school board and
Yep.
and expansion, and do they have suggestions? What about, we've sort of been riding on the port to find out, what they're planning on doing the waterfront on both sides of town. But there's other kinds of development that we should be concerned with, particularly residential development and BC Housing, like, with the rent, with apartments becoming fuller, rents are going to start to go up, and lots of people whose income is still very low we need to make sure that BC Housing is on the ball.
I think something the council could consider, and the whole community may be best served by this. As we grow here to accommodate port facilities, we can all think of policing services, fire rescue services, educational services, particularly at the college and university level, but certainly with some emphasis on grade 10 and up. If you're planning to stay in Prince Rupert, what would your focus be? Here's the kind of careers that are being offered, and so they get some advance notice. You not only think of fire, police, and education, but of course healthcare, which we talked about. But perhaps the best thing and the best way we could serve the community would be to put letters out to these various agencies, telling them that we intend to have a meeting in the first part of September to get their comments, to get their thoughts on these things, and ask them to do some background work in consideration of having up to 7,000 construction workers here on large projects and small projects in a few years. And also invite the Prince Rupert Port Authority, who will be the landlord for a lot of these projects, to talk about what they see coming forward, so that these various agencies will get an idea of how they can be accommodated. And of course, if those various agencies are determining how they're going to accommodate this growth, where are they? They're all within the city of Prince Rupert. And it would be of interest also to the District of Port Edward. So maybe we can do this on a combined effort and give these agencies some advance notice. So obviously, because they've got offices or branches or ministries or agencies in other communities that have experienced this, they could do some information sharing, and our get-together with them may be of real value for us in going forward. If the council thinks that's appropriate, we could ask staff to do something along those lines. I'm not sure how everybody feels. Yes? Mr. Roden, did you get the gist of that? If you could, thank you very much. Councillor Garon, I think you were waiting to say something. Okay. Anything further? Councillor Rice.
I just wanted to say that I'm phoning in tonight because I attended on behalf of City Council the Ferries Advisory Committee meeting today, which happens annually down here in Vancouver. And I won't really take too much time, but I did want to say that people may recall that recently this fall, BC Ferries was traveling around the province doing consultations with communities because they need to somehow save $26 million in the very near future. So there were potential service level cuts that would which would have a detrimental impact, I think, to northern and central coast residents, since it is our only highway essentially. But I did want to say that the good news was that today everyone, including ferry staff, found out that the provincial government. So basically, these service cuts were due to happen this June, at the end of June. But the provincial government has decided that they will extend their influx of money that they've been providing to help subsidize the routes, the ones that are really not profitable, which are unfortunately the routes that impact us the most here in Rupert and Haida Gwaii and Central Coast. And so that no service levels are expected until at least March of 2014. So I thought that would be some good news that people might want to hear.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anything further, Councillor Rice?
No, that's about it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for attending those meetings on behalf of City Council.
Great.
And our residents.
Yeah. My pleasure.
Thank you. I'll do the mayor's report now if there's nothing further from members of council. So I attended the Council of Forest Industries' most recent conference at their invitation, along with many Northern British Columbia mayors and regional district chairs, and they outlined the state of the forest industry for Canada, and in particular Western Canada. And the demand for Western Canada's wood and forest products is growing. There are a shortage from other parts of the world where logs had previously been attained. And as a result of no longer being able to obtain those logs, there is now more of a demand from Canada. And as there is a shortage of logs, the demand has increased for Canadian lumber. So there's been quite a demand for value-added forest products, and currently it's anticipated that the demand will remain strong until 2016 or 2017. I also participated in a Board of Directors meeting of the Western Transportation Advisory Council in preparation for their next meeting and to provide direction of the organization's policies and objectives. And the organization continues to grow as demand for goods and commodities from Western Canada continues to increase. And when we attend these meetings, particularly the public meetings, which are held twice a year, it's the city's opportunity to meet with all of the major transporters of goods in Western Canada, whether it's trucking firms, whether it's rail lines, whether it's producers of forest products, producers of coal. So really, it allows the city to get close to those people that are very interested in the movement of goods in Western Canada. And of course, a lot of their focus now is on Prince Rupert, and some of them will end up as resident companies here as a corporate entity. I want to talk a little bit about Watson Island. And the city has been pursuing the various parties involved in Watson Island, and as a result, I've been to 6 different meetings on this, and on the first 3 meetings, I was fortunate enough to have Councillor Thorkelson, Councillor Kenny, and Councillor Rice with me. So initially, we met with the provincial government regarding Sunwave and the state of Watson Island and the concerns for the leftover chemicals in particular. There's chemicals out there that have been left over. The pulp mill was shut down in 2001. It was never decommissioned. These chemicals have been left there. There's been minimal maintenance done. There's a concern. There's still chemicals even in some of the lines there. So not only is there the chemicals, but there's also PCBs out there, and there's also asbestos. So we met with Minister Pat Bell about that. We then met with Minister Bennett, who is the minister responsible for municipal affairs, and we talked about the legislation concerning unpaid taxes and property seizure. And the concern is that when you take a piece of property for unpaid taxes, it's very hard in some circumstances, particularly in this one regarding Watson Island, to obtain clear title. So we asked the minister to consider under the Enabling and Validating Act for local government legislation to tailor the appeal process so that if a municipality is in the unfortunate circumstance where it must seize property, it can then get clear title to the property after perhaps just one appeal and get on with getting that property back on the tax roll. We also met with members of the provincial opposition regarding Sunwave and the concerns about the first 2 matters, the matters of the state of the mill, the leftover chemicals, and the change of legislation, which would certainly be appreciated. I wouldn't wish this circumstance on any municipality in British Columbia. It's very hard to deal with. Some people have heard me say, and it is correct, that if we didn't have somebody helping us as they're looking at opportunities to acquire Watson Island, if we didn't have somebody help us with the monthly maintenance costs out there, commonly referred to as the burn rate, it could actually bankrupt this municipality in 13 months. So it's an issue for us. This council has been dealing with this issue for an extended period of time now. We're trying to find our way through it. But between not having clear title, between having outstanding issues for a small piece of property out there, having issues also with the chattels which are left there, and by the way, the chemicals and the hog fuel out there, never mind the equipment and the buildings, they're all considered chattels. By not getting a lot of cooperation from the former owner with regard to those chattels, the city certainly ended up with the property and the buildings, but the chattels are the responsibility of the former owner. And of course, when the city acquired this, the city then must have the care and control of those things. And so we're looking for some support from the provincial government, particularly with those chemicals, because if they are to leak, you could poison our local fishery, and that's not only the salmon fishery, but it could also affect any area where there's halibut larvae. It could also affect Dungeness crab, particularly if it's black liquor. If black liquor lands on something, whatever it lands on, it kills. And the tide out there runs anywhere between 4 and 6 knots. So it wouldn't take very long if you had a sizable spill to contaminate the waters around Prince Rupert, around Watson Island, around Port Edward, around Lelu Island, around Ridley Island, around Coast Island, and even out towards East and West Kinahan, and even up into our harbor. So these things are a concern to us. Further to that, after meeting with Minister Bell and Minister Bennett and members of the official opposition, I then asked Minister Bell if he would support the City of Prince Rupert meeting with the Consul General of the People's Republic of China. And Minister Bell and I and Mr. Roden did have an opportunity to meet with the Consul General and the Vice Consul and some of the other representatives, and we did talk at length about our concerns, and they pointed out to us that Sunwave Forest Products, albeit owned by a Chinese entity, was a private company, that they would ask them to meet with us. And so very shortly thereafter, we had the opportunity to meet with a representative from Sunwave. And while Sunwave did not say anything definitive, they did understand the circumstances, and we're hoping to be able to work with them. And if we don't get the opportunity to work with them, those chattels out there, whether it's the chemicals, whether it's the hog fuel, whether it's the equipment in the buildings, still has to be dealt with. So we've done that also, and beyond that, we've got some court dates coming up, and we're anticipating that those will happen in the early part of the summer, and that may in fact provide some relief to us. But this issue is long-standing for us. It's very hard to deal with. From a bureaucratic point of view, it's a great catch-22. But the city certainly needs to deal with those chemicals before anything out there on the land or the water gets poisoned that will affect the other livelihoods in our area. And the city certainly needs to get clear title to that property so that we can sell that property, see it developed as another port for vessels of 50,000 deadweight tons or less to carry products to and from Prince Rupert. And we also need to, beyond selling the property, getting on the tax roll, we need to see that meaningful employment for people in our area. So that's an update on it. We are optimistic that we'll see some resolve here with regards to the chemicals. We'll see those court cases going forward, but we're hoping that we can satisfy a variety of the concerns and get that property again, creating some employment here. The last item I'll mention, and I'd ask the council to consider this, is that some corporate entities, in considering Prince Rupert as a location for their shipping terminuses, are inquiring about community projects. And so I'd ask the City Council if they'd like to consider the cost of a marine laboratory and the staffing of it as a priority community project for consideration by corporate entities making inquiries of community projects. And the reason why I mention a marine laboratory would be to help reestablish the shellfish industry here, so that when they're harvesting clams or cockles or gooey ducks, we would have a lab here that would be able to do that testing. And of course, if the testing is good, that would allow the continuous harvesting, and it would create support for a seafood industry where we could see some local growth. Of course, the laboratory would be there to do the testing year-round, because at various times of the year, the appropriate tides, better to harvest some shellfish. So I'll just leave that with the council. If there's nothing further, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Kenny. Any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. This meeting stands adjourned.